We're going to be in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 2. A little bit of chapter 3, but mainly chapter 2. All right. May 13th, 1940, Winston Churchill stood up to deliver his first speech as the Prime Minister of Great Britain. This was just days after Germany had invaded France, and it had become clear very early that once Germany decided to invade France, France would not be able to mount the defense that it needed. And for Great Britain, one of their primary means of defense against Hitler and his advance toward Great Britain was that they had the buffer zone of France to kind of stop things. And very quickly, they realized that that buffer zone was not going to hold quite as long as they thought it was going to, that the machine of war was going to be coming towards Great Britain very, very quickly. Churchill had just been named Prime Minister and gave his first address. And I remember this is well before American involvement in World War II. America was still trying to figure out, what do we do with all this stuff? Should we get involved at all? This is early on in those days, but Great Britain was staring down this tiger that was advancing toward them, and they were staring them down in effect all by themselves. And that's when Churchill delivered his first address as Prime Minister. And in this address, he kind of lays out the situation they find themselves in. He says some kind of preliminary marks about the role of Prime Minister and the complicated task that he's been given. And then he comes to this. This is to be the kind of line that is meant to, I think, instill in people some confidence in him. And he says this line that becomes famous, but at the time it kind of gets overlooked. He says, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." And he would go on to say this. He says, "We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle and of suffering." It's not exactly an awe-inspiring speech, is it? It doesn't exactly make you stand up and be like, "All right, let's go. We've got this. I'm so glad that this guy's in charge. He's got nothing to give us except that he's gonna work hard." He's got blood, toil, tears, and sweat. That famous line was almost forgotten as this speech kind of became a perfunctory, just kind of move through it type of speech at first. But as the war waged on, these words took on new meaning. They took on a new importance. And what became clear is that Churchill wasn't kidding. That really was what he had to offer. And there really was going to be a long, long grind of war before them. And they would grind through this war. But Churchill had prepared them for it. He had prepared them for whenever the bombers would come to Britain in the Battle of Britain. He had prepared them for the day whenever the war would reach inevitably to their shores. He had prepared them for the grind that they were about to go through. And he was the man to lead them through their dark hour. And I tell you that story because it reminds me so much of where we find our hero Nehemiah this morning in our story. Chris led us well last week, detailing the courage that is required by Nehemiah to step up and to step out on this crazy task that God had called him to go before the king in what could potentially be a suicide mission, a death mission, to go before the king and say, "Hey, I want to go and be a part of rebuilding this in a different place and leave this place of honor as cupbearer to you." Could have been a very dangerous thing, but instead God blessed him, and he had the courage to go and to do it. And today we're going to see what happens when he actually gets his hands dirty, and he shows up, and he gets into the work that he has been called to do. I want to read to start with from Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 9. This is Nehemiah writing. He says, "Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent me with officers of the army and horsemen, but when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. So I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. So Nehemiah, he makes this long journey. He shows up to make this long journey to this capital city that has got the temple built. It's got a few homes rebuilt, but the wall is in ruins. We'll see that here in just a few minutes. And he is now shown up to be the guy to fix things, to put things in to its proper into its proper place and build the city the way that it should be built. So he makes this long journey, likely over 4 months. We're not exactly sure, but probably over 4 months to get where he needed to go. And right off the bat, we're introduced to some rising tension in the story. Right off the bat, we're introduced to something that Nehemiah is going to have to deal with all throughout his book, all throughout this book. As soon as he gets there, the moment his feet touch the dirt in Jerusalem, he has got enemies. They do not like that he is there. They do not like that he is on this mission. They do not like that he has the emperor's backing. They do not like it at all. In their mind, the success of Israel means the downfall of their society and of their culture and of their country. They did not see this kind of, the rising tide raises all boats. You've heard that before. That is not how they saw it. What they saw is in their area, in their region, it was a zero-sum game. The more one people prospered, the more the other would fall apart. The more one people grew in strength, the other people would grow weaker. And so the idea that Israel was going to try and regain its strength after now well over 100 years of being next to nothing did not sit well with these other leaders of these other people. They did not want this to happen at all. There was only so much room for power and wealth in the area. And these two guys, Sanballat and Horonite, knew that the arrival of Nehemiah meant trouble for them. And I don't want to spend too long picking apart all the details of what happens here, because there's a lot in the book of Nehemiah that is kind of by the way of description, not prescription. We'll say that a lot over the next few weeks, where it's describing what happened. It's not telling you this is the way it should happen, just explaining that it's the way that it did happen. But I do think there's some kind of things we can pull out as we go through here, and so I don't want to spend too long. But if you find yourself in a position where you are saying things shouldn't be this way, this is chapter 1 of Nehemiah. Remember, where he's blessed with his burden and kind of goes into mourning over the state of Jerusalem. So if you go and you realize that there is that things should not be a certain way, and then you decide, I'm going to do something about it. That's the beginning of chapter 2 of the book of Nehemiah. What you will find is that you almost always have people that will push back against you and your burden. Almost always. This is just about universal. You will have people that will push back in some form or fashion. It's how human nature works. We grow accustomed to the darkness and prefer that we stay in it over helping to bring in the light. Nehemiah arrived on the scenes, and he had enemies from day one. You will either have people that will tell you this burden that you have, either it can't be done or it shouldn't be done. One or the other. And it just depends on the people you're around and what it is you're dealing with. But you will always have people that will push back and say, I don't know why you're wasting your time. You can't fix this problem, or you shouldn't fix this problem. It's just the way it is and the way it always has been. The second thing I want us to see in these verses that I don't want to overstate, but I don't want us to miss either, is in verse 11. Nehemiah shows up, he gets into town, he finds out he's got opposition. He's been on this long journey of several months to get to from where he was at in the capital city of Susa to Jerusalem. He shows up, and what does he do for the first 3 days? In verse 11 it says he shows up and he spends 3 days in Jerusalem. Do you know what he does? Almost certainly, absolutely nothing. He doesn't do anything at all. He does exactly what I want to do after a long trip. Last weekend I said we made a quick run to the beach. A quick run to the beach is kind of a misnomer because the stay is short, but it takes just as long to get to the beach. So you still have to make the same drive. You still have to get there. And whenever I drive for an extended period of time like that on a road trip, when we get there, my kids are like, woohoo, they want to go run around the room that we're in. They want to go run around, check things out. Everybody wants to get all the luggage unpacked so they can get their stuff out. My wife's like, let's go to the beach. Let's go check this out. I want to go check all this out. I'm like, I want to find a bed or a couch. And I just want to stretch out and just show that I can actually still straighten my legs and are not permanently in this position. That's what I want to do. I want to rest. I just want to rest. And so we get there, and that's all I want. Nehemiah wanted the same thing. After this long journey, he was tired. He just wanted to rest, and that's what he did. He stopped and he rested. Listen, when I hear some of the schedules that some of y'all have, I get tired just listening to all the stuff that you have going on. And I understand this dilemma too. We have been right in the thick of all of those things when you start talking about kids' sports and kids' activities, and it's May, which just means you can set the calendar on fire because it's getting ready to get really, really crazy for us. And sometimes that's what's needed. You got to get in there, you got to get through it, you got to do some of this. But sometimes what's needed, even more so than action and doing things, is just rest. There's a difference between being a sluggard and being a person who just wants to kind of catch their breath before they head back into the fray. But some of y'all can't figure out why you feel like you are failing in everything you do. You feel like you're a bad wife. You feel like you're a bad husband. You feel like you're a bad mom. You feel like you're a bad dad. You feel like you are a bad employee, a bad friend. And for some of you, it's just because you've built zero margin into your life to pursue any of those things. As I've said before, sometimes the most godly thing you can do is admit that you aren't God, that you have finite resources, and you can't do it all, and just take a nap. Sometimes that is the most godly thing that you can do. And I don't say any of that to heap condemnation on anyone. I realize that whenever you are feeling super tired and you're feeling the weight of the calendar, the last thing you want is somebody telling you, hey, you shouldn't be doing so much, because all that does is make you feel guilty for the next thing that you have to be at and the next thing that you have to do. And so I'm not calling you out for whatever you've got going on over the next 2 weeks or whatever, but what I am telling you is when you build a calendar, you need to pay attention to the margins. You need to pay attention to finding time where you can say, this day is a day to breathe. This day is a day to stop. This day is a day to recuperate. And that is what you do. And you have to put some of the stuff out of your mind. You have to sacrifice some things that you would like to do sometimes. Sometimes you need to do what Nehemiah did, and you just need to do nothing. So there, you have full permission for that. But I also fear that this is probably one of those things that you are going to file in the good advice that you just can't take section of your brain. But I'm just telling you, you shouldn't. You need to be able to find that somewhere in your calendar, somewhere in your life where you can build that in there and be intentional about that. So back to Nehemiah. He shows up. He's there. He kind of hands his papers. He tells the officials that he's there. The officials know that he's there, but he doesn't do anything for a few days. But then he begins to establish what's going to be his life for the next several years. And here's what I want to do. I want to see what happens when Nehemiah finally says, all right, let's do this, what I've come here to do. So Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 11. So I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days, and then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one which I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. This would be by the Babylonians that took them into captivity. And then I went on to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. And then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, and the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. So Nehemiah essentially heads out under the cover of night. It's a moonlit night. Does a little moonlight reconnaissance, and he shows up and he says, I just want to know what is going on here. I just really want to see what I've heard about with my own eyes. He doesn't want to draw attention. He doesn't want to get distracted by excuse makers around him. He just wants to see what's going on firsthand. He wants to see if things are as bad as what he's been told. He wants to know what work is going to be required and what people are going to be required for the job. In short, he's counting the cost. He's counting the cost of what is before him. And this is yet another step that we can so often forget when God calls us to something. With best intentions, the burden God gives us can often lead us to this overwhelming sense of that you just need to do something. What that is or whether that's helpful is up for debate. So long as you do something to kind of ease that burden in your conscience, that's all that you want to do. I remember the first time that Chad Sparks had suggested that I go to seminary. Chad was my pastor when I was in high school, kind of discipled Emily and I still remember where I was on the back deck at someone's house. It was a cookout for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I was a senior in high school. It was about this time of the year, senior in high school, and Chad was saying, so what are you going to do? Are you going to go to school? What are you going to study? And I said, I really have no idea right now. I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen. But I really have loved, what I've done with Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Maybe I would like to work for FCA one day. And Chad said, well, that would be awesome. But you know what FCA really needs? They need people that have gone to seminary. And here's what my response was. I laughed in his face. I laughed in his face whenever that suggestion came to me that I should go and do more school after I was done with the school that I was planning to go to at the time. I said, there's no way I'm going to do that. My goal was to get through college as quick as possible. And so the idea that I would go and do more school for 3 to 4 years after that was absurd to me. I did not want to count the cost or pay the price that might be required for me to pursue this potential other job. Now, things happened after that, and things went in a lot of different directions. But the point that I want to make is I didn't want to do the extra work that was necessary on the front end. And I can tell you that I've had similar conversations with people over the years when I have said the exact same thing. When they have said the exact same thing to me. And I've said, if you're going to follow Jesus, you would do well to do what's necessary before you go do the task that he has called for you to do. You say, well, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Are you saying we all need to go to seminary? Absolutely not. Don't believe that for a second. Everything I learned in school, you can learn on YouTube. So you can learn all of that kind of stuff. But here's what it might mean for you to follow Nehemiah's example. It might mean that you need to do something crazy, like you might need to just get your passport. You say, well, I'm not going on a mission trip. Well, maybe you just need to get a passport because you might need to go on a mission trip. And if you've got the passport, you're ready to go whenever God calls you to go. You just go ahead and get it and be ready for it. I know a church I used to be at, they would tell you whenever you became a member of the church, part of membership is that you were supposed to get your passport so that you would be ready to go on a mission trip whenever that day came. So maybe it's just something like that. You just need to be prepared. Maybe you need to get outside your house more. You need to know your neighbors better. You need to have real conversations with your coworkers and build a relationship with people so that when the day comes and they have questions or crisis comes in their life, you are ready to speak into their life and to say, let me tell you about Jesus. Let me tell you about this place that I found that is home in Jesus. You might need to go to seminary. Some of you might need to do that, but you may just need to know your Bible better. No seminary required for that. You might need to, who knows, maybe you need to learn a foreign language. Maybe you need to, there's all kinds of things I could throw out here, right? But maybe what God's calling you to do is just prepare in your mind for what he might be calling you to do. Just get your mind and your heart ready for what's about to happen. Start to count the cost. Sometimes God isn't using us not because he doesn't have a task for us, but because we haven't done the work to prepare our hearts to be used. Nehemiah needed to know more about the shape of the city wall before he could begin to tell the people about the project and what was needed. So he set out to learn, to know, to be prepared, and to take an up-close look at the task ahead. He set out to count the costs. Now the next step is interesting because he knew he was going to need help. He knew after he saw the shape of the walls and how it had been destroyed and how he couldn't even ride underneath the gate that was supposed to be set up for the city. He knew the hard work that was before him. And now he's got two options before him. Remember, he's got paper in his hands from Artaxerxes. He's got papers in his hands that says, here's what Nehemiah has come to do. He has full authority to walk in there, come over to the governor of the region, to come to the mayor of the town, and to say, get me these people. I need these skilled people. I need them on this wall over here. I need these people to do the manual labor. Here's what I need you to do. Bring them in. This is their job now. I don't care what they were doing before. This is their job. He had full authority to put people to work. He could have done it that way. And I promise you that would be the easier way to do it. To just tell people, I have a position of authority. You go do what I need you to do. But that is not what Nehemiah does. Instead, he brings the people together. He shows up with the people, pulls together all the officials, all the priests, all the nobles, all the people that had any kind of stake in the city of Jerusalem, and he says, let's talk. Verse 17. He says, then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. So he says, here's the deal, guys. This city's in bad shape. I need your help to help me fix this. We have a massive project on our hand. It's going to take all kinds of manpower to make this happen. These stones we have to just move are massive, let alone the ones we have to put in its place to fix it and to fix the problem here. He says we've got all of this stuff, and it's going to take all of us pulling together. We must do this if our people and our God are going to gain any kind of reputation among those around us. We have got to get to work. We have got to do something about this. Now, at this point, what he is telling the people is probably a lot like how it works with my kids. And I'm like, hey, I need you guys to clean your room. And I can't tell you how often I tell Isaiah, I need you to clean your room. And he'll say, oh, but it is clean. And then I look at it and I'm like, I can't even walk in here, Isaiah. Like I can't, you have glasses everywhere. You have cups what do you mean it's clean? And legitimately in his mind, he thinks, it's not that bad. There's some clothes on the floor. You know, there's a few things here, there's a few things there. Yeah, I got some toys out over here. It's a mess. It's terrible. But he needs somebody to be able to say, no, this is not clean. This is not how we're going to do this. You need to fix this. Abby's smiling back there, but she's just as bad too. But we need, they need somebody to say, no, this is not what it's going to look like. This is not what we're going to do. This is kind of what, sometimes you just get used to the mess. You just kind of get used to how things look. You just kind of get used to it, and it's like, it takes somebody that's a bit of an outsider to come in and be like, really, this is how you live? This is how you do this? You kind of need that. This is what Nehemiah does in Jerusalem. He shows up and he talks to these officials, and he's like, y'all can't do this. We're not going to do this anymore. But the way that he says this and the way that he does this is not by demanding that people come to work with him or work for him. Instead, what he does is he casts a vision for them, and he says, I have this burden. I think you should have this burden too. Let me tell you about what brought me here. What brought me here is the name and the reputation of God, the name and the reputation of God's people. the name and the reputation of who God is and how he cares for his people, that is under attack. It is rightfully at this point in question, and we need to do something about that. And so he lays that burden out for them. Nehemiah is telling them that they have grown so accustomed to life in this burned out city, they don't even realize what it does to God's name and those around them. He needs people to be with him every step of the way. And just telling them what they had to do was not going to work. They needed to carry that burden with them. They needed to know the why long before they were told what to do. But once they knew the why, the what would flow a lot easier from that. So Nehemiah says, this is why. Here's what needs to happen. And then in verse 18, and this will be kind of our key verse for the rest of the morning. In verse 18 it says, "And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken for me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work." I love this little verse. There's a lot of theology packed in to this one little verse. He tells the people gathered around, he kind of gives them the recruiting pitch. He lays out his burden for them, and he says, let's get to work. Now the rest of chapter 2, and you go into chapter 3, will lay out the details of the work. It's good for you to read that. We're not going to pull out all the details, but what you will begin to see is that everybody got involved in this. It says they had perfumers helping build the wall. I have no idea how you get a perfumer to build a wall and it stay, but that's who they had building the wall with them. Everybody was there doing the work, handing the bricks to one another to make sure the wall got built. Every job, every social status, every political status, everyone was there to build the wall together. And then in verse 18, we have two things that a lot of people would put against one another. But Nehemiah has no problem seeing the two things synchronized together and work together. And in fact, this is going to characterize all of Nehemiah's actions. It really already has and will be for the rest of the book. And it's one of the questions I get asked as a pastor fairly often. What is your view on God's sovereignty? Well, there's a lot more that I would need to answer that question, a lot more time I would need to answer that question this morning. But I like Nehemiah's approach right here in verse 18. I like what he has to say. At the beginning of verse 18, he says that God's hand had been on him for good. He uses this phrase a lot. A lot. Already has in the first chapter, and will use it a lot throughout the rest of this book. And every time that he does, he's making it clear. I feel good about things because God is sovereign and God is in control. I believe that God is fully in control here. He was fully dependent on God's gracious hand to guide him and to care for him. Undoubtedly, Nehemiah shows this time and time and time again. And as we read through this book together, I want you to see how many times Nehemiah says this. And then what I want you to see is what that means for him. Each time Nehemiah is seeking to show that God has been in control of the entire process. And it never ever means for him to avoid the task that come with the project. When he says God's hand has been upon him, God's hand has been at work, it's a remembrance of what God has done, not a ticket to avoid what needs to be done. And then you see these words that should reverberate through your head, I think, for the rest of the week and maybe for the rest of this series. So they strengthen their hands for the good work. Nehemiah never sees God's sovereignty over and against man's agency and man's ability to work. He sees the two working in harmony. God is in control, but the work is now ours to do. The work in this sense of pushing back the darkness and doing the work that they have been called to do. The work to not simply just bow our heads and pray. We'll talk about that again all throughout this book, how often Nehemiah prays. But we don't just ask that God would do it. What Nehemiah sees clearly is that we ask that God would do it, and that God then comes to us and says, okay, here's how you guys go do it. This is how God works. You know, God could do it that way. We pray, say, God, will you push back the darkness? And God could do it unilaterally on his own. But that is not how he chooses to do that. Instead, he calls his people to carry out his work in the world. That's you, and that's me. That's Nehemiah, and that's all the people in Jerusalem to build the wall. That's us. He calls us and says, now y'all get to work. Yes, I agree. Let's push back the darkness. Here's how I want you guys to do it, and I'll be there. And so what do they resolve to do? God, strengthen our hands for the good work. Let's get to work. And the rest of this book, you will see that. You get to work. People working. I'll be honest. Part of my job as a pastor, part of my job description, I think somewhere in there, it says that I'm supposed to over-spiritualize things, right? That's how I have like job security whenever I stand up to preach. I make things like super spiritual that maybe you just don't realize that they're actually like spiritual things. That's the job description of a preacher. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'll say two things to that. One, I'm not necessarily sure that it's actually possible to over-spiritualize anything. Because in God's economy, there is no divide between sacred and secular. There is no such thing. It is all his. All of it. Everything. Sunday morning and Monday morning. Sunday morning in church, Monday morning at work. There is no distinction in those things. That is all his. Your worship here on Sunday morning and your work tomorrow morning and what you do in class in school this week, it is all his. They are all under the same banner of Jesus Christ. Now they serve different purposes, they do different things, but they are all his. There is no distinction between sacred and secular. There's nothing in your life that is not ultimately born of a spiritual component. I can't over-spiritualize, but especially when we're talking about work. Colossians chapter 3, in a couple of different places, says, whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. There is nothing secular. There's only a perspective that gives us false categories to put it in. Because if the devil can get you to believe that your life is divided between what belongs to God and what belongs to you, then he's already won the battle. It all belongs to him. But with that being said, I think sometimes we can read the Bible and we read a story like Nehemiah's and we can think that somehow he's more spiritual than we are, that his work is done for a different purpose, and therefore there's a different component to it that doesn't really play into our work. And for sure, Nehemiah's work plays into salvation history. So there is a bit of a different work there, and your job does not. But in essence, the call to work is the same for Nehemiah and for you. In essence, what Nehemiah had to do was just plain old hard work. In claiming that everything is spiritual and sacred, which we do, what I just said, we cannot move to we cannot move hard work into the category of just religious jargon and inactivity bogged down by hollow prayer and feel-good sentiment and kind of bathe it with this religious language. Like we cannot do that. We don't need to couch our work in religious language to infuse it with religious meaning. Sometimes the most godly thing you can do is take a nap. But sometimes the most godly thing you can do is just get to work. Do the work. Work hard. You know, I think one of the things that I misunderstood as I went through college and was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, I think one of the things that I misunderstood is that I thought that maybe work would be this thing that I would do that would enable me to do other things. But what became clear to me, and this is irrelevant of the fact that I'm on staff at a church doing ministry vocationally, this would be true no matter what, and this is something I came to long before God called me to be a pastor, was the realization that we value as Christians far too little hard work. We put too much emphasis on the idea that the work needs to bring some sort of like satisfaction and some sort of like this inner like, oh man, this just feels great. I love what I do. Sometimes what God calls us to is just hard work, whether you enjoy it or not. It's just getting after it. And that is a spiritual thing. I'm not knocking pursuing a career where you feel like, I'm going to be fulfilled in this and all that stuff. If you want to do that, that's great. And if you are one of the lucky few that are able to get into that place where that's what you do with your life, that's great. But don't dismiss the value of just being a hard worker. God blesses that, and God will use that. And that very much has a spiritual component to it. It is all His. Sometimes the most godly thing you can do is just work hard. Nothing more, nothing less. It's not more spiritual. It's not less spiritual. It's just hard work. So for us here at Providence, what that looks like, what that means for us is that we strengthen our hands for the good work. Some of you, that just means that you need to understand when you get up and you go to work, when you go to class and you work hard in class, that is not just some sort of divided, separate thing, but that is work that is devoted to God. And you need to pray, God, make me a hard worker. So for some of us, it means that we need to not dismiss that burden. You've heard Shay come up here this morning. You've heard Elena come up here. You've heard us talk about Life Outreach Center. And there could be a dozen, I hope there is, a dozen other things that are on your heart out there. But you bear that burden, and then you pursue what God has called you to do. And you don't get hung up on religious talk and religious things. You just get to work. That's what Nehemiah does. He just gets to work. And it may just feel like you're a lot like Churchill. You got nothing to give except for your blood, toil, tears, and sweat. But the awesome thing is, God will bless your blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Will you pray with me? Father, this morning we thank you that we do not have to work for our salvation. That we do not have to work because the work has been done in Jesus Christ for our salvation. But Father, we also thank you that you call us to work hard, rooted and based in that salvation to do your work. So Father, I pray for those in this room. I pray for all the different careers, jobs, everything that's represented in here, the different ministries that are represented in here. I pray for a renewed sense of purpose, a renewed sense of committing that work to you. And that hard work would be a blessing to their employer, their employees, to their co-workers. But most of all, that it would bless you. And that we would be a people known for working hard. Father, thank you for your Son. And thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the work you are doing here. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.